Ned Stark arrived in King's Landing with a heaviness in his heart, but he wore his sense of duty like a shield. The noise of the city crashed over him in waves. Cries from the street vendors, the clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the hurried footsteps of messengers trying to outrun time. At first, he remembered Winterfell's quiet cold where each footstep in snow was softer than any murmur of the king's court. But duty demanded he leave the wolf's den behind and stand in the lion's den instead. He promised Robert, his old friend, that he would serve as Hand of the King. He had promised to protect the realm if he could. He had promised to do what was right. From the moment he crossed the Red Keep's gates, he felt the place was riddled with secrets. The city itself reeked of ambition, and each corridor within the palace seemed to echo with unspoken conspiracies. As he walked through the lushly furnished hallways, trailing a line of Winterfell retainers behind him, he sensed the weight of eyes on his back. The Lannisters had eyes everywhere, or so he suspected, and after all, this was their territory more than it was the Baratheons. King Robert might wear the crown, but the gold that supported it came, in large part, from Casterly Rock. Yet Ned's footsteps did not waver. This time, he had decided that he must choose a path more subtle than confrontation. He remembered all too well the bloodshed that had followed in Robert's rebellion, when Tywin Lannister had sacked King's Landing in the name of the new king, but cunningly ensured his family's place at the seat of power. If Ned was honest with himself, he disliked the Lannisters. He disliked their arrogance, their ostentatious display of wealth, and, more than anything else, the dishonorable rumors that seemed to trail in their wake. Still, he reminded himself that he could not yield to righteous anger if he hoped to protect his family, to honor the promise he had made to keep the peace. He was greeted by the Master of Protocol and escorted into a receiving hall where Cersei Lannister waited, resplendent in a gown of emerald silk. Ser Jaime Lannister stood nearby, clad in the Kingsguard's white. He leaned against a tall pillar, an unreadable expression on his handsome face. A few other courtiers flitted about. Ned felt, for a moment, like he was being presented for judgment rather than welcomed. He bowed to the Queen, remembering that, for all her pride and cunning, she was Robert's wife. "Lord Eddard," she intoned, dipping her head with the faintest hint of courtesy. "King Robert has prepared a feast in your honor this evening, but until then, he's asked that you make yourself at home here in the Red Keep. We trust you had a pleasant journey from the north." He returned a stiff bow. "Your Grace, the journey was long but safe. I thank King Robert for his hospitality. I look forward to serving him and the realm." She studied him for an instant, as if she meant to pluck the truth from the lines in his brow. "We hope so indeed, Lord Stark," she said lightly. Jaime made an offhand remark about the staleness of the city air compared to the north, but Ned let it pass. It was Cersei's mood he was trying to gauge, and he could see that she was content to maintain a veneer of politeness. He decided he would do the same, at least for now. Inwardly, he braced himself for the next move in this peculiar dance. Though he loathed the idea of politics, he recognized that a blade could come in many forms. Diplomacy might shield him from an immediate confrontation with the Lannisters. If he was too blunt, if he challenged them openly the way he had once intended, he might seal both his fate and the fate of his loved ones in a single stroke. He found Robert in the courtyard, whacking a training dummy with a blunted sword. The king's face was red and sweaty beneath his bushy beard, and he let out bellowing laughs each time he struck. Around him stood a circle of onlookers, some lords from minor houses, some gold cloaks, and a few curious retainers who relished the chance to watch the king's latest attempt at reliving his glory days on the battlefield. When the king spotted Ned, he flung away the practiced sword and hurried over, arms outstretched. "Ned, finally, I can sleep easier at night knowing I have my old friend by my side again." He clasped Ned's shoulders in a warm greeting. It was the warmth of a man who still thought more of the battlefield than the throne room. "I trust Cersei's made you comfortable? That woman can be... well, you know." Ned nodded, careful to keep an even tone. "She was gracious, Your Grace. The accommodations are more than sufficient for me and my family." Robert wrinkled his nose in dissatisfaction. seemingly disappointed by the formality of Ned's reply. The king preferred jests and japes over careful neutrality, but Ned would not indulge him now. Not on this first day. He had too much to learn about the city's mood and about the Lannisters' intentions. Still, Robert dismissed the tension with a wave of his hand. "Ah, you'll settle in soon enough. Come, let's drink." No matter how many years passed, Robert's love for feasting and ale never diminished. He ushered Ned into his solar where, as promised, he broke out the strong wine and cups of gold and silver. As the king drank with the fervor of a man trying to chase away ghosts, Ned sipped slowly, scanning the tapestries on the walls and the table scattered with documents and ledgers. The business of the realm was in shambles. Robert's style of rule had run up astronomical debts, and half the lords in the 7 kingdoms were angling for advantage. But if Ned had come here to untangle that knot, he needed patience. He decided to broach matters carefully. "Your Grace, once I've had a look at the ledgers and spoken to your council, I'll see what I can do to shore up the realm's finances. Seems the crown is—" "Bah!" Robert made a dismissive gesture, but not unkindly. "All of that can wait until tomorrow or the next day. You've only just arrived. I want you fresh for the feast. Then yes, you can read the ledgers, meet with John Aaron's old stewards, do the dull things men like us never wanted to do when we were young." He smiled wistfully as though recalling their old battles side by side. "And Ned, be mindful around the Lannisters. I'd rather not have to choose between you and them if it comes to that." Ned's heart tightened, so Robert saw it as inevitable that Ned might find conflict with the Lions of the West. But conflict could be postponed, if not averted entirely, with the right approach. "I'll heed your words," he said simply. Despite the heaviness in the air, Robert's boisterous presence soon took over. By the time the feast began that evening, Ned could not help but feel a cautious optimism. Perhaps with diplomacy and composure, he could keep the realm intact and guard against the Lannisters' potential treachery. Perhaps he might even discover the truth behind John Aaron's death. At the high table in the grand hall, torches burned bright, illuminating the king in his finery and the queen at his side. Ned sat near them as was expected of the hand. The crowd was thick with lords and ladies, many wearing their house colors. In the front rows, Ned spotted Sansa and Arya, seated with Septa Mordain, while Jory Castle stood behind them protectively. Sansa glowed with excitement, delighted by the pageantry. Arya, on the other hand, wore the bored look of a child who would rather be chasing cats through the courtyard. The feast unfolded with fanfare. Roasted boar, fresh baked bread, lemon cakes, overflowing cups of wine. Jugglers and singers took turns entertaining the crowd, while a pair of dwarfs acted out a comic pantomime. Ned only half listened, eyes drifting across the hall until they settled on the Lannisters. Tywin Lannister was not present. He remained in the west, presumably attending to matters of gold and governance. But Cersei, Jaime, and Tyrion Lannister were all gathered. Tyrion, the dwarf known as the Imp, sat a few seats away from his siblings, wearing an expression of guarded amusement. Jaime lounged in his seat, as though the entire feast was a spectacle meant for his personal enjoyment. Now and then, Ned caught Cersei glancing his way. Their eyes met for a split second, and a silent exchange flickered. He understood she was judging him, trying to read whether his presence threatened her family's position. Once, he saw her turn to whisper something in Jaime's ear, though the Kingslayer made no reaction beyond a lazy smile. When the court musician began a new ballad, something praising the glory of House Baratheon, Robert took the chance to engage Ned in conversation again. "You remember that night in the Vale? The feast at the Eyrie, after John Arryn bested Lord Belmore in the tourney?" The king let out a rumbling laugh. "You were so sullen you barely touched your drink, and I asked you if the cold in your bones wouldn't let you dance. You said, well, do you remember what you said?" "I believe I said I was not much for dancing, your grace," Ned answered with a small smile. "And it's still true, though I've learned to step carefully enough these days." Robert snorted. "Step carefully, yes. You always were a cautious one, except in war. In war, You were as fierce as any man I've known." He clapped Ned on the shoulder. "Just don't let your caution keep you from spotting the knives in the dark." Ned knew that was the crux of it. On this path, caution could save him, but it could also blind him if he forgot that betrayal often came clothed in courtesy. So, when the toast was called in honor of the new hand of the king, Ned stood, raised his goblet, and offered a measured smile. "To King Robert and Queen Cersei, for their generous welcome. May the seven bless this union and the realm." He felt the attention of the hall shift to him in that moment, to see if the reticent wolf from the north would offer more than a cold salute. He let his voice resonate, forced a warmth into it that he did not entirely feel. "I am honored to serve as hand. May our efforts together bring peace and prosperity to the seven kingdoms." He noted how Cersei inclined her head, a faint smirk dancing on her lips, a silent acknowledgement that she, too, would play her role in this dance. That night, after the feast concluded, Ned retired to his chambers. He paced across the floor, ignoring the sumptuous tapestries, the velvet drapes, the gilded furniture that seemed too fine for a man accustomed to Winterfell's stark simplicity. Varys had visited him briefly, as had Peter Baelish, each offering cryptic remarks about the nature of the court. Littlefinger, as sly as ever, gave him a cunning smile and suggested that, as hand of the king, my lord, you must keep your friends close and your foes closer. Though he wouldn't clarify precisely who fell into which category, Ned had lost count of the times he heard warnings about the Lannisters' cunning. Every rumor said the Lannisters were plotting to ensure that the power of the Iron Throne truly lay in their hands. But he also recalled something else. People so rarely simply admit their guilt if confronted directly. Accusing Cersei and Jaime of treason without proof would be as good as throwing a torch into a barrel of wildfire. A more diplomatic approach might show him the truth, or at least help him navigate these dangerous waters. So, in a departure from his usual straightforward manner, Ned set aside his immediate desire to question them about the circumstances of Jon Arryn's death. If Jon had discovered something damning, Ned would gather proof quietly, carefully. He would wear the mask of courtesy, ensure that any potential ally remained open to him. Only then, when he had the truth, would he act. He awoke early the next day, determined to get a start on the tasks before him. He strode into the council chamber where Lord Renly, Grand Maester Pycelle, Peter Baelish, and Varys waited. All of them rose for the new hand, offering bows or polite nods. Ned was not naive. He knew each man had ambitions and secrets of his own. But the realm needed them all to be at least functionally united. Ned took his seat at the table's head, with the king's seat empty at the far end, an ornate monstrosity of carved wood and gold. "We have much work," Ned began, voice calm, betraying no discomfort. "I've requested the ledgers. I want to see where the debts lie, how deeply we owe, and I want any notes Jon Arryn left behind. I'll not let his efforts go to waste." Baelish steepled his fingers. "Ah yes, the crown's finances. Quite the riddle, my lord. You'll see that we owe the Iron Bank, the Lannisters, and more than a few Tyroshi bankers. Paying them back is another matter. Perhaps we can discuss ways to restructure some of the debt." His tone was smooth, with that undercurrent of mischief he always carried. Before Ned could respond, Pycelle cleared his throat, a ponderous sound from an old man who enjoyed hearing his own voice. Indeed, indeed. Lord Arryn was quite methodical in his approach, but the poor man grew distracted in his final days. He spent much time reading old records, paying visits to the city's armorer, and, if I'm not mistaken, speaking to Lord Stannis on certain matters. All, I fear, quite mysterious. Ned latched onto that piece of information. Lord Stannis? I trust he returned to Dragonstone not long before Lord Arryn's death. Indeed, my lord. He left quite suddenly, as if disturbed by something, Pycelle replied, though he never confided in me personally. Across the table, Varys offered a soft smile. Lord Stannis is not known for confiding in many, but we might glean more if the hand were to send a letter requesting his presence. Yes? Ned weighed the idea. He still was not certain who might be reading his letters, or intercepting them. If Stannis had discovered the same secret that Jon Arryn had, and if that secret threatened the Lannisters, then sending a letter might alert exactly the wrong people. But neither could he leave that stone unturned. "I'll consider it," he replied gently. "For now, I'd prefer to know more about Lord Arryn's final inquiries here in the city. I understand he was in search of a certain book in the archives. Was he not?" Peter Baelish's eyes flickered. "Ah, the lineages and histories of the great houses, I believe. Musty old tome. One wonders why the good Lord Arryn would need to bury himself in genealogies." Ned hid his sudden interest behind a neutral expression. "Indeed," he said quietly. "I'll have a look at that book when time allows." He allowed the conversation to move on to petty disputes in the city, plans for an upcoming tourney, and other matters of state. Yet all the while, in his mind, he weighed how best to approach the Lannisters themselves. If Jon Arryn had stumbled on something about their line, was it possible that they were behind his death? Or was it sickness, as Pycelle so often claimed? Ned suspected the former, but suspicion alone was a poor guard for his own neck. The days passed. He settled into a routine of reviewing documents, meeting with the council, and speaking to the people within the city to gather clues. Where he might once have openly challenged the queen, he now spoke to her with carefully measured respect. Where he might have accused Jaime of arrogance, he now nodded politely in passing. He knew that each day he was sowing an image of respectful caution, an image that might keep the Lannisters from acting against him prematurely. Cersei occasionally crossed his path in the courtyard or in the council halls, always dressed in her best finery, always with her regal chin held high. The queen rarely missed a chance to remind the courtiers that the power of the Iron Throne flowed, in some measure, through her. And yet she, too, maintained civility with Ned. She would comment on the north or on Sansa's progress, or she would inquire how he found the city's air. Sometimes the conversation was innocuous. Sometimes it was laced with subtle barbs. But never did she openly clash with him. Ned suspected that she was waiting, watching. If she realized he suspected her of something, she gave no sign of it. Tyrion Lannister, on the other hand, turned out to be an interesting ally, or at least an interesting distraction. The imp visited Ned one afternoon in the library, where the hand was quietly scanning through the lineages and histories of the great houses. Tyrion's uneven gait and sharp grin announced his presence. He was not a man who could slip through a crowd unnoticed. "My Lord Stark, so diligent in study. I've always said that when one lacks height, one compensates with knowledge. But you, on the other hand, what knowledge do you seek in these dusty books?" Tyrion had that mocking, genial tone that could be friendly or hostile, depending on one's perspective. Ned closed the book carefully. "Just familiarizing myself with matters of the realm," he replied in a neutral voice, giving nothing away. "Jon Arryn was reading these as well. I thought I might find some insight. Knowledge is never wasted. Wouldn't you agree?" Tyrion arched a curious eyebrow. "Oh, certainly. But I do wonder if you search for knowledge that would better remain undiscovered. The truth, after all, can be a dangerous thing if the wrong people learn you have it." Ned did not rise to the bait. "Indeed, Lord Tyrion. And one wonders who those wrong people might be." With a grin, the imp shrugged. "Oh, the realm is full of them, I assure you. Hardly a day goes by in King's Landing without some rumor or another. It would be a pity if the new hand fell victim to the same perils as his predecessor." He paused, studying Ned's face. "I for one hope you don't. I find you less tiresome than most." The faintest flicker of a smile touched Ned's lips. Tyrion was not exactly an ally, but there was a bluntness in his words that Ned almost appreciated. "I hope I don't either. Thank you for the advice, Lord Tyrion." Tyrion gave a little bow and departed, leaving Ned to wonder. Was that a warning on behalf of House Lannister or a personal sentiment? Tyrion, if the rumors were true, was not the most beloved son in his family. Perhaps he was just curious, or perhaps he genuinely wanted to steer Ned away from direct conflict. Regardless, Ned decided to keep to his plan. Gather the truth slowly, quietly, maintain a show of courtesy, and keep the peace as best he could. If the day came that he had to reveal what he knew, it would be on his own terms. Time wove onward, and Ned gradually collected small pieces of the puzzle John Arryn had left behind. He learned that John had visited a blacksmith's apprentice, a boy with dark hair and a strong jaw who bore a surprising resemblance to King Robert. He discovered that John had been investigating the lineage of many houses, focusing on hair color and other traits. He read the genealogies thoroughly, noticing the pattern. Whenever a Baratheon and a Lannister had children, the golden hair of the Lannisters seemed to dominate, until Robert's supposed children came along, and all of them turned out fair-haired like their mother. The revelation struck Ned to his core. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen bore no resemblance to Robert. If the pattern in the book was correct, they should have all had Robert's dark Baratheon hair. Instead, they were undeniably blonde like the Lannisters. This was what John Arryn had discovered. This was the secret that might have led to his demise. The children were not Robert's at all. They were bastards born of incest between Cersei and Jaime.